All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Poisson. I'm here with my colleague in Washington, Alex Panetta. Hey, Alex.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So we have just watched the vice presidential debate, and we're going to really get into it in a second. But first, I actually just want to take a moment to reflect with you on the fact that this debate was pretty normal. Just two guys who were fairly polite to each other. A very policy-centric conversation, not what we got with that disastrous debate with Biden and Trump, not what we got in the debate between Trump and Kamala Harris.
Listen, after the car crashes we've witnessed this year, this was like an uneventful trip to the grocery store. This was pretty simple.
Dare I say boring?
Oh, I like boring. I've covered 3 elections featuring Donald Trump. I'll take boring.
But it really is also sort of a testament, I don't know if that's the right word, to Trump, who has fundamentally made this like a reality TV show. That when he is absent from the debate, it's now like watching C-SPAN and not The Apprentice.
Absolutely. I mean, there are things that Donald Trump has introduced to American politics that are going to stick. There are other things that he has only accentuated that already existed. For example, lies, right? There were some nose stretchers, which we could talk about as well. But, not on the scale or the scope or the frequency that you see with Trump, right? And there are other things he just completely changed about American politics, the gratuitous insults.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the exact opposite of that. As a matter of fact, the candidates who kind of greeted each other, a little tentatively before the debate at the end were like, they had a long chat on stage. They introduced their spouses to each other. They were slapping each other's arms. It's like they looked like friends at the end.
Yes, yeah. Towards the end, Walt said,
"Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one,
which I don't know, just is really something to watch. But having said that, it wasn't all boring. There's still lots for us to talk about tonight. And I do want to talk about J.D. Vance first with you. So I was really interested, I don't know about you, going into the debate tonight to see which version of J.D. Vance that we were going to get. The really fiery Fox News guy who in the past has talked about how the country is being run by childless cat ladies.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies.
About people eating pets in Ohio.
We've heard from a number of constituents on the ground, Caitlin, who both firsthand and secondhand reports saying this stuff is happening.
Or if we were going to get something different. And what did we get?
Yeah, well, we got a much more cerebral version of the guy you see on Fox News, and frankly, people who've talked to him, and I personally have not. People who have talked to him say that that's kind of the real guy. I mean, this is a person who's written a 3,000-word essay on his conversion to Catholicism that quotes St. Augustine. Like, he's a thoughtful person, and even where that stuff on the childless cat ladies comes from. I mean, he is of the belief that it should be the policy of the U.S. government to encourage the creation of families, and through child tax credits and supports for working parents.
We're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide childcare options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
This is not the traditional position of the post-Reagan Republican Party or post-Goldwater Republican Party. It is a conservative party that believes the government is always the problem, always wrong, and not the solution to your problems, right? He's actually one of the reasons, you heard Walt say there's some commonality here, because frankly, on economic issues, there is more commonality today than the Democratic and Republican parties than there has been in some time. The Trump Republican Party is actually closer in some ways to the Democratic Party. In other ways, it's not. Absolutely not.
And, you see that around their positions on manufacturing. Just elaborate on that for me a tiny bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, the way economic debates tended to work in Washington in the last few years is Republicans were militantly pro-trade. Any attempt to interfere in the economy was called socialism. Government supports for people were, derided. And of course, I mean, I'm caricaturizing it a bit because there are always exceptions. But, the fact that you have a Republican vice presidential candidate talking about, child tax credits, The fact that they're talking about more tariffs on top of the tariffs they already placed because they see manufacturing as inherently good because it creates stable families
Hmm.
in working class communities. I mean, this is not. I don't want to beat a dead horse here because it's been known for years that the party's changed a bit. But I think what was really striking is you had someone channeling Trumpism in a much more fluid and sophisticated vocabulary.
It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal.
And this is not something that Mike Pence would have done, right? Mike Pence was not a Trump-style Republican at all. So, Vance appears to be very sympathetic to the philosophy of Donald Trump, but he speaks in the language of a former editor of the Yale Law Review, which is what he is.
And do you think that that will resonate with people watching the debate tonight? I guess maybe put another way, what did he have to do tonight? And did he do it?
Yeah, well, I guess his objective tonight was, well, twofold. One is, along the lines of what we're talking about, to try to present a sympathetic face, to sort of, disabuse people of the impression they may have had of him. Elections are close here, right? So you want people to sort of think, okay, this could be a president if anything happens to the, soon to be octogenarian Donald Trump. That's the first objective. The second thing is to try to just continue to push the frame of this debate as being about Kamala Harris. And then that's almost the flip side of what Walz was trying to achieve. You may have noticed how often Vance mentioned Kamala Harris.
That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. And that, too, has gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies.
And how often Walz mentioned Donald Trump.
Trump was in office. It was Donald Trump. Donald Trump pulled that program. Donald Trump's fickle leadership. Donald Trump tweeted because that's the standard.
Because frankly, those are the big fish in this election. No one's voting, or very few people are going to be voting based on how they feel about J.D. Vance and Tim Walz.
What do you think Vance's best moment was?
Well, I think there was this one moment where he really hit his stride, where he tied everything together. The more popular elements of his platform, we're not talking about abortion here. We're talking about some of the more economic, beat up on foreign imports kind of stuff, tied with his criticism of his principal target, which is Kamala Harris. And he tells Tim Walz.
Honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman.
That to me is like, it's the entire argument in a nutshell. And it's frankly delivered way more eloquently than Donald Trump ever could for his own campaign.
Worst moment?
The January 6th stuff, 2020. As much as this debate was a glimpse into American politics without Donald Trump, it was a reminder, like a record scratch, that Donald Trump is still a very important fixture in the American political firmament.
Mm-hmm.
And that this man tried to steal the last U.S. presidential election. And at one point, Walz said, look, there's something I can't get past here.
When Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned
and that was a reminder that the reason Mike Pence is not the vice presidential candidate is because he refused to allow Trump to steal an election, refusing pressure from Trump, ignoring the chance, the kill Mike Pence chance on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. In a normal world, J.D. Vance is not on that stage. And when Vance was pressed about what he would do or whether the election was stolen in 2020.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
He couldn't answer. Or he avoided answering.
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump
and that was not a glorious moment.
Yeah, he just said he wanted to move forward, and Walz essentially came back to him and said that that it was a damning non-answer, I think is what he said, which, I think it's fair to say that that was probably Walz's best moment in the debate, right?
I think so too, and I think Tim Walz, if he could do it all over again, he would have had that 2020 segment near the beginning of the debate rather than at
Yes,
the end when the
90
fewest
minutes
people.
in
Yeah,
and
exactly.
everybody's tuned out. We're going to come back to Walz in a minute, but just sticking with J.D. Vance for just a moment longer. Something that I was thinking about and that came up in our group chat during the debate is that, the Democrats have spent a lot of time trying to label Trump and Vance as weird, right? And I do wonder if tonight that strategy might have backfired to a certain extent because people might have been expecting something that they didn't get. That, instead, he probably didn't seem weird and actually seemed quite persuasive and reasonable to many people.
Yeah, I mean, it was very personable. I mean, at one point when Tim Walz talks about his son,
Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you as a member.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy.
I mean,
awful.
he seemed like a nice, normal person, right? And look, I'm sure all of the things, the criticisms that have been said about him, some of them carry a truth, but they are caricatures. There's an incomplete portrait there. And it would be like watching Kamala Harris laughing clips, which or selectively edited clips by the Republican Party, and concluding that that's Kamala Harris. It's not. People are more complicated and complete.
Mm-hmm.
And tonight you saw, like I said, the former editor of the Yale Law Review was able to quote St. Augustine, and who's by all accounts a pretty friendly, amiable person, also very conservative, but also espousing a kind of different brand of conservatism, pro-family, pro-manufacturing, let's rebuild our communities type of conservative that was not really the focus of, the George W. Bushes and Ronald Reagans of the world.
One thing that was interesting is that one of the criticisms of Walz that people made kind of immediately after the debate was that he didn't do enough to push back on Vance, right? To kind of surface this long history Vance has of doing and saying all sorts of stuff. And that, that was a real failing. And I wonder if you would agree with that. And if so, where that happened.
I think you're right. J.D. Vance has endorsed a national abortion ban in the past. He doesn't talk about it anymore.
I certainly would like abortion to be illegal nationally.
It's not whether a woman should be forced to bring a child to term. It's whether a child should be allowed to live, even though the circumstances of that child's birth are somehow inconvenient or a problem to the society.
Now it's basically, he's taken Trump's approach, which is leave it to the states and, and let's include some exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother.
We have to accept that people do not want blanket abortion bans. They just don't. We have to provide exceptions for the life of the mother, for rape and so forth. That is just a basic...
But, really, it's not our issue at the federal level anymore, right? But that's not what he used to say. And if he became president one day, either, by replacing Trump, through an act of God, or, went on to the presidency at some later point in his life, would he sign a bill that Congress sent him? That's, that didn't come up. And I don't think Walz pushed very hard. I don't think, he could have mentioned January 6th a little earlier. He could have said, look, the only reason you're here tonight is because Trump sees you as likelier to help him steal an election than his previous vice president. That didn't come up till the end. Walz could have maybe pushed it a little harder earlier on. Frankly, I thought he looked a little nervous at the beginning. Walz was, let's be honest here. I think he was less polished than Vance for most of the debate. He recovered somewhat, but he still suffered more hiccups than his rival. Including one wince-inducing quote where Walz says,
"I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look,
I think he meant to say he was friends with school shooters."
I think he spoke, but there was quite a few of those in his first answer about the Middle East. Both candidates refused to give a straight answer on whether they would allow Israel to launch a preemptive strike, but he mixed up Iran and Israel a few times.
The expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it.
He seemed very nervous. He had another really rough moment when he was asked about whether he was in China during Tiananmen Square, right? And just tell me more about what happened there.
Yeah, so I don't blame Waltz for being nervous on the Israel answer because the politically, I mean, that's just going to cause you heartache no matter what you say on that issue. I was actually kind of surprised Vance didn't bite harder on the Israel question. But no, I mean, probably the worst moment of the debate for Waltz was when he was called out for having claimed on different occasions in the past that he was in China during the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. He said that a couple of times, and it's not true. He went to China a couple months later, and he's been to China many times because he led a student exchange program. But it was such a fumbling answer.
Being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you.
He tried to avoid admitting that he lied or made it up. And sort of talked about the value of cultural exchanges, and he was pushed. The moderators pushed him. He kind of admitted to misspeaking.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said.
Mm-hmm.
But this is kind of part of a pattern with Waltz. He has embellished his CV a few times. He sort of exaggerated his military rank a little bit. I'd call that a small white lie. He kind of like earned a rank and was downgraded upon retirement, and he claimed one he didn't have. He claimed to have used IVF when IVF was in the news. He and his wife had not used IVF. They used other type of fertility treatment. And this is I guess the trifecta of CV embellishing statements he's been called out on. And so in a normal time, this would have possibly been, the political story of the year, like a candidate who kind of makes up parts of his CV. But, we are not in normal times. I said.
We've got 2 assassination attempts.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just a lot going on in this. We were talking before about how the narrative around J.D. Vance is not the whole portrait, right? And Waltz rode into this campaign on vibes, really, these like social media vibes. He wasn't on anybody's short list to be running mate, right?
Yeah.
And people loved that he was this folksy dad, coach, teacher, just speaking real truth.
Well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And we don't have the 10 Commandments posted in our classrooms, but we have free breakfast and lunch.
And do you think that translated on the vice presidential debate stage tonight?
I'll say it was funny. It was almost like a bizarro world version of Kamala Harris. Okay. So Tim Walz, one of the reasons I think he was picked as her running mate was he was great in interviews. He's good at media interviews, at least from the ones I've seen. Very thoughtful, folksy. Replacement level player at best as a debater. All right. And when I say replacement level, I'm comparing him to other, people in the upper echelons of U.S. politics. Whereas Kamala Harris is the opposite. And Kamala Harris in media interviews, it doesn't usually shine. But she was just a wizard on that debate stage a few weeks ago, right? That was one of the best debate performances I've ever seen, if not the best. And so it's funny, like Waltz is kind of the opposite. Great at one, not the other.
So look, I know this is something that you have said to me before, that generally vice presidential debates don't really move the needle in presidential elections. Actually, it doesn't even seem like the last presidential debate moved the needle in this election. But do you think that anything that we saw here tonight might have the potential to tip the scales one way or another in this insanely close race that is really going to just come down to a handful of swing states?
I'm happy you added that caveat at the end, the closeness of this race, because in a race like 2020, for example, where I think it was like 42,000 votes or something like that, decided a trio of swing states, and frankly the election. Pretty much anything can swing 42,000 votes. The weather in Detroit on election day can swing 42,000 votes, right? So yeah, I mean, this could have swung the election. But my prior bias entering this conversation is that no, on the long list of things that affect the presidential election, the vice presidential debate, certainly one that's, not so lopsided, would not be on, the list of top 10 things that affect the election. But again, in a paper thin race, you never know.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a great place to end this conversation. Alex, thank you so much for this. It was great chatting with you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jamie.
All right. That is all for today. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.